Welcome to Popcorn Therapy with me, Julie Peters. This is a place where we explore the stories that we love in order to understand something about who we are. So the episode that you're about to hear is a little bit different from what we normally do here. This is actually taken from the episode that I last published about Pedro Pascal, where Jeremy Johnston-Kaye and I went on a pretty long tangent about modern fatherhood, modern motherhood, parenting from a feminist perspective, and all sorts of things that came up around that. We touched on it a little bit in the Pedro Pascal episode, but I wanted to pull it out because there was just so much there that I really did want to share. So if you're looking for Pedro Pascal, you want to go back to the last episode on the phenomenon of Pedro Pascal as the internet's daddy. We're not really talking about pop culture in the following episode. It's really just more about parenting. So please enjoy. And we will be back to our pop culture focus in the next episode that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for listening. As always, please like, subscribe, rate, review, share this with your friends, leave a tip or a donation at juliepeters.ca/tipme. And those are all really great ways to support the show if you're enjoying it. So thank you so much, as always, for listening. Here we go. All right, welcome back, everybody, to Popcorn Therapy, where the stories that we love tell us something about who we are. And I have a special guest with me today, Jeremy Johnston-Kaye, who is an old friend. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for being here. I really appreciate it.
This is awesome.
Yeah, so how would you like to introduce yourself? Like, is there anything in particular you want folks to know about you?
I mean, like my professional work is I'm a political and labor communicator. That's what I do as a profession. But my background is psychology and political economy are kind of the twin threads of where I come from, and so like that very much informs the way that I see things, sort of at least from an academic lens. And so that's sort of all I think folks really need to know is by way of an introduction.
And you're a dad.
And I'm a dad. I've got 2 kids, 12-year-old boy, 6-year-old girl. Figuring that out, we're very much on the cusp of that transition to teenagehood, which I think is very salient to the conversation that we're going to have, and just how like scary sometimes that can feel in you know the world that we are currently living in. And so yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm a little bit of ways ahead of you. But
12,
there's
yeah,
lots of interesting stuff in your future as a parent.
I'm sort of terrified of that age for many of the reasons that we'll talk about today. You know, a boy entering into teenagehood and adulthood in this current climate is going to be a challenge. It's always parenting is a challenge, like the whole thing, you know. And I think that the conversations that you and I have had have partly been interesting because you're someone that really thinks about what it means to be a parent, what it means to raise a child, like in patriarchy, in capitalism, in white supremacy, you know, in all of these systems that we're slotted into and that we exist within, you know, every day. How is that going to affect our children and the day-to-day choices that we make?
You pointed me in the direction of a book that I'm really interested in digging deeper into, which was Boy Mom, and Ruth Whitman, I think her name was, her work on this, and I really liked her use of the term impossible masculinity.
Me
which
too,
is
yeah.
To be both hard and soft, to be both like, you know, vulnerable but, you know, restrained, and all of these kind of like this nuance that seems to be articulated in various ways, but, you know, very difficult to cobble together as we try to define like what modern masculinity is.
Yeah, so that book I heard about on an episode of Jon Favreau's podcast Offline, and that interview with Ruth Whitman was so, it was like quenching a thirst, I think, for me that I had. You know, she talks about a lot of really interesting things, that concept of impossible masculinity. You know, there are a couple pieces in that interview that really have stuck with me, but one part is when she talks about how within teen sexuality, I guess, or like young men's sexuality, and young women's sexuality. There's this thing about choking that's happening right now. It's like the cool kink. And what she found when she was interviewing a lot of men and boys about this was that it wasn't that they were instigating the choking. It was that the women would be, actually. They would be wanting this, like, you have to be strong, you have to be, like, intense, you have to be violent. But these boys also know if I make one wrong turn, then I could be canceled, right? Mm-hmm. Or worse. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think that's something that, that's just so hard to hold. And with a lot of the men that I work with, these are the kinds of questions that come up around, like, how do I approach a woman? Or, like, how do I express my sexuality in a way that's not going to be perceived as violent or dangerous. And I don't think that's new. I think men's sexuality has been weaponized for a long, long time. And so there's sort of an expectation that comes not just from men, but also from women and other genders, maybe that, like, men should be this. Like, these archetypes still exist within the culture, and they're still very strong, even though, like, a lot of people, women especially, I guess, want men who are trustworthy and safe and kind. But then there's also this internalized stuff around, like, so therefore you have to choke me or whatever it is in order for me to feel like it's okay to, like, have sexual. I mean, that, you know, this is obviously kind of a big layered complex conversation around sexuality, but I think that's one of the pieces that she describes that feels so impossible.
Oh, absolutely. And I totally agree. And there's been a really conservative approach from sort of, like, masculinity towards modernity, which is that it's like, you know, I feel like so many people are just like, I want a 1950s version of the household where I come home and my wife greets me with a beer and I sit on the couch and I don't have to do any of the parenting stuff and whatever. And, like, that's some version of that archetype is what they imagine. And because they haven't moved beyond that, it's like, you know, simplistically, it's like, well, you know, women can wear pants, women can work in construction, they are encouraged to be engineers and computer, you know, designers and all of these things that they're encouraged to be now. And men still, like, what is a traditionally tolerable man remains very narrow. Mm-hmm. And any departure from these things is seen as a major transgression. And so men still don't occupy caregiving roles, and they're not seen as caregivers. You know, 10%, 12% of men take parental leave of any kind of, like, real substance. It's like, that's shocking to me. But for me, it's like the idea of dad as babysitter.
Right.
Which is, for me, just such a galling idea. And as a man, I find it offensive. Not because somebody else is layering it, but because so many men tolerate it. And for me, that's really, really frustrating and annoying. Like, the idea of, like, man as this, like, buffoonish, like, useless kind of figure in family life, in society.
Like, and I'm having some interesting times in my own family situation. I have 2 boys, and so, of course, this question of how to raise boys is a big question in my house, right? And my husband and I have had some very interesting conversations about, like, well, let's think about what our parents looked like and how they held gender roles and their parents before them. I do a lot of family system stuff in my therapy practice, and, you know, you often parent the way you were parented by default, right? Like, mm-hmm. unless you do some work around it and some mindfulness around it, you're going to tend to do just whatever happened with you. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there's been so much movement in a generation or two around what gender roles mean, and who's doing what around the home. And, you know, that's such an interesting one, the way that you're talking about, you know, men babysitting, like dads babysitting their children. And just this absolute default. And I noticed myself doing it too. It's like this default of, like, I'll go visit the daycares, you know, I'll do the research to figure out what his school transitions are going to look like. You know, there's all this emotional labor that it doesn't even occur to me mm-hmm. a lot of the time that I could ask my husband to do it, or that he could think of it himself. Right. And at the same time, you know, there are those moments that you find of, like, my husband does a lot around the house. He does what he can, and, like, he'll take the baby grocery shopping or whatever, and, like, everyone's fawning over him, like, oh my god, like, it's a dad with a baby, like, there's no mom, like, what a hero. You know,
I know, the bar is so low.
The bar is so low.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. No, I was on parental leave with my first at the same time as a friend of ours, and that dynamic played out all the time. Like, the degree to which I would get fawning praise, and I would, like, you know, take my kid out my attitude is very much the fewer bags, the soonest I can. So what I would be like, there's no snacks, there's no drinks, whatever, we'll figure it out, we'll make it work. And like, so like kids in like shorts and cold weather and whatever, like all these like things. And I would get positive interactions, and my friend who was a woman and a mom would get little nitpicks. People would feel empowered to go and like nitpick aspects of her parenting in a way that was really intrusive. And it was never more clear to me the difference in how people see dads and moms in the parenting context. And it's really a shame, because I mean, like, that these things there are pile-on effects to this, right? Where it's just like, you see these things, and if you're not, like you said, if you're not mindful about these things, if you don't think about and process these things, then they become simply parts of your reality, and we then tend to replicate these kind of things. We replicate what we're rewarded for. But I mean, like, yeah, it's a strange dynamic.
Yeah, I had also shared a little clip of Elena Bridgers, who I follow on Instagram. She's somebody that does a lot of research on hunter-gatherer societies, and her thing is motherhood until yesterday. So she talks a lot about like modern motherhood and how it's different or similar to what she's studying in hunter-gatherer societies. And she had done a poll about, I forget what the topic of the poll was, but basically it was this idea that a lot of mothers were unsatisfied with feminism. So you and I started having a conversation about that I thought was quite interesting. And, for me, I will say, like, my feminism changed quite a bit when I became a mother. I feel like I had a very, like, internalized 80s shoulder pad sort of feminist assumption, right? Like, as a child of the 90s, I've also felt so disillusioned by feminism in a lot of ways, because, like, as a teen in the 90s, I was like, I can do anything, and like, I have all of these sexual rights, and like, it was all very positive and optimistic. It was very girly pop, like, kind of girl empowerment and stuff. And there's been a backlash, I would say, probably many backlashes. Like, there's an ebb and flow to this stuff, since then. But when I became a mother, it was like, okay, my body is affected by this in a way that my husband's body is not. Like, his body does not experience fertility, menstrual cycles, miscarriage, pregnancy, birth, like all of these things, and the long recovery that some of these things can take, and how that affects your body. And then this idea that the whole idea of bouncing back, which I know there's a lot of criticism about, and like not everybody's on board with that, but you do see sometimes like celebrities having a baby, and then they have this like incredible body a few weeks later, where in reality it can take years, plural, for your body to completely recover from that experience. So I felt like there was a literal physical piece that I hadn't really taken into account when I thought, like, well, maybe I'll have kids, but I'm not going to slow down at all with my work, and I'm just going to push forward. And this has affected my relationship in some ways too, right? It's like I'm someone that, like, I'm lucky enough to do work that I deeply love, and I can be so creative with it, and I'm a little obsessed with the things that I do, mostly because I love doing them. And yes, I partake of the workahol, from time to time, and that's like one of the coping mechanisms that has always been there for me, is like learning, research, work, and so on. And even now, I'm kind of feeling this pull of, I want to do all these things, and also my baby's so young, and there's the mom guilt that comes up, and that idea that like people feel like they could judge, what your friend had in her bag when they were at the park and stuff. Like, you do get this sense that everybody's looking at you as a mom, and the way that you're parenting, and the things that you're doing wrong, and whether or not you're using childcare, and when, and all of these things. Like, there's so much judgment to face. So there was that piece. And also, like, I know this is kind of a dumb thing to say, but it blew my mind that I had to pay to work. Like, that blew my mind. Like, this idea that, oh, okay, there's a child now, and if I'm not watching him and my husband's not watching him, we have to pay someone else to do that. So wait, like, what do you mean? We can't just go, you know what I mean? Like, obviously it was just something that I hadn't experienced before. And so, suddenly that concept of my feminism had to change to, it's not that women should be working exactly as much as men. It's more so that we need infrastructures that allow for parental leave on both sides. We need to shift somehow. And I mean, it's hard for us to even think about a world in which those gender roles, I guess, could be equal at home, where, the defaults that we have internally would be shifted a little bit, so that emotional labor is shared a little bit more, or shared differently. I mean, I don't know that it needs to be totally 50-50, because these things are the body is involved and all of these things. But it still feels like, my work is the one that will suffer first, that I will tend to make less money because I'm in fields that are more, definitely more feminine coded. My husband, who's in the military, very masculine, sort of archetypal role, which that's a whole other conversation. He has some very interesting things to say about that. But, anyway, we're coming at it from so much complexity, and I'm just seeing so much of it show up in my personal life that I kind of wasn't expecting. And so all of that to say, I think that is a really interesting thing to think about around. I'm not sure if feminism is the problem, and I'd love to hear more about what you have to say about that. But just this idea that a lot of the moms that responded to Elena Bridgers' reel were saying, yeah, I need more. Like, this isn't working for me, right?
Well, that was the post that triggered sort of the conversation that became this conversation, which I thought was really interesting. And I thought she did a really good job of addressing like some of the nuance within those answers and things. But I mean, like, the thing that I took away from it again was that, like, what I really like about the simplistic definition of feminism that my mom gave, which was simply like, feminism is the belief that women are people. And you then look at something like, I think feminism's gone too far. And so women are too people-y, right? Like, because that's a logical extension of that. Instead of being like, feminism has freed women to have choices. And those choices now abut up against a system that is not built for families. It's a system that was built, generously for a single income family where a woman typically would be a caregiver, a job that is non-valued or undervalued, however you want to like frame that. This is kind of an aside, but one of the things that always frustrates me is that the people who pretend to be the staunchest advocates for a traditional family, a structure that would look very much like that, a single earner, male, and a stay-at-home woman, are the same people who advocate for an economic system that's destroyed the single earner household anyways. Modern capitalism has made it essentially impossible, unless one of you is an incredibly high wage earner, to actually survive in the economy as it exists right now. But I get it too. I worked in politics for a little while. It took me a long time to deprogram from the pace of that. I still struggle with the idea of like genuine rest when I should be taking time to relax, and instead my brain is going like, why aren't you being productive? That that grind kind of mindset. But yeah, it is hard. But my attitude as a man who has now been through this twice is that like the early part of parenting, there are like roles that are defined by sex, essentially. It's like, women have the babies, breastfeeding is a thing that only you can do. There's a period of time where your body, as you put it, is on the hook for that work. But almost everything else, we live in like a modern society, and once you get rid of a few of those things, there really isn't any reason why either partner can't do most of that. And in fact, like that was my wife is an important person, and she does a lot of work. She had to leave. She did a lot of work on the road and things like that. And so like during the time when I was on parental leave, I did the full caregiving thing. And I'd be lying if I said that was easy. I am an only child. I never had to caregive a sibling. The most I had done was like teach some sort of 3-year-olds for a brief period of time in my professional development and whatever. But like I had never handled a baby. I'd basically never been in a room with a baby before I was taking one home from the hospital. And so, the flip side of the thing, as a dad, that's interesting is that women have this whole period through gestation and all of this thing where your body is literally changing and accommodating to become a mother. As much as that process is, at the end of the day, your body basically going through like a car accident to produce this life, like you are chemically setting yourself up to kind of like just love and adore this creature and to nurture it. And for dads, we're kind of adjacent. We're very much adjacent to that. We don't go through that thing until we are suddenly thrust in that role. And so it is a challenging transition. It was a challenging transition for me because I was never a caregiver. I never had to fill any of those roles, and so it was kind of being thrust into a very strange situation and just being like, okay, now we keep this tiny person alive. Like, how do we do this? And all of those changes. But it is. I do think that like it's important. I think from like at least from my perspective, looking at feminism, just as we do with masculinity and things like that, it's that like the fact that women want to have it all or can't have it all isn't a fault of feminism. Right. It's a fault of the structures around us that make that difficult to happen. The fact that we have to grind so hard, that our work-life balance has been deteriorating, that our real incomes have been falling relative to everything else for so long. The fact that we, at least in the Western world, are increasingly shrinking our communities and the boxes around us as a family unit. And so one of my favorite Kurt Vonnegut quotes is when he's talking about the relations between men and women, like both parties saying, "You are not enough people."
Right.
And like expecting our partners to be our everythings and not having real community around us. And I say that as somebody who's like I say this as a hypocrite because I'm a homebody. I love to be alone. I need my alone time, and I try to be an advocate for communities. I'm not religious, but I recognize the role that communal spaces like churches and community centers, and like Lions clubs, and all of these other spaces that used to be places where people of disparate backgrounds would come together and build community. Like that we're losing those, and we're losing those increasingly, and we're seeing that our young people are losing that at an even faster rate. That like social cohesion and things like that, and the safety net. I mean, it's I always say that community is what dragged us out of the caves into the world that we exist in now, and we somehow believe in the modern world that we can be without that and not suffer psychological consequences. And I just think that that's just like such a fraught idea and such a false one. And unfortunately, it's what it benefits so many people who drive the economic engine of the world that we live in to actually atomize and isolate. And I think that the crisis in loneliness, the crisis particularly in male loneliness and stuff like that is the exacerbation of that. Because one of the things that I wanted to touch on was like having the tool set. I think it was one of the things that you were talking about was like as a man, like I feel when I was put in situations and I watched my wife like make friends with other moms and stuff like that, and I feel myself being like, not only do I not know how to, but I don't necessarily even want to like form those bonds. It's not an impulse that I have. My approach to parenting is very practical. It's problem solving. It's kind of, as we talk about raising boys, like it's been very interesting taking these ideas and like seeing them put through the lens of parenting a young boy and watching them grow and watching, your values reflected back in these things. But it's like as a man, even raised by, progressive, well-meaning parents, like I still just find that I don't have those tools. And I mean, that's not I make it work from time to time, but it's not something that comes naturally. It's very much a process that I have to work towards, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that like that is probably a step too far for most people, right? For people who aren't doing the work, who aren't thinking about it, who don't have the time or the space to be mindful about the way that they the way they putter around life.
Yeah. One of the things that Elena Bridgers talks about that I found very comforting is that idea of village, that it's kind of weird that we have these nuclear families that are just two parents and however many children, and that's the unit, right? And it's sort of odd that there is this incredible pressure on mothers to be alone with their children. And I feel like, so my kids go to daycare. Not my 4-month-old will, not yet. But daycare has been like, like I want to bow down and worship daycare. Like, thank God for daycare,
Yes.
And there's so much fear and judgment around that, right? I've studied attachment in my travels. And from an attachment perspective, I think you can misinterpret that with this idea that like a mother specifically, like the pressures on the mother to be physically bonded to the child for like the first 2 years, basically like, you know, nobody else can kind of get inside of that bond. And I feel like for me, I'm a better parent to my children. I have more patience, more curiosity, more interest in them when I have space to be myself, like be in my identity through my work, my friends, even my relationship with my husband, right? Like there needs to be the space for these other aspects of our personalities as parents, I think. And this idea that mothers especially should be sort of subsumed into motherhood is very intense.
No, I'm a strong advocate for like the oxygen mask approach to parenting.
Right.
Which is very much like you need to take care of yourself because it all comes out in your parenting one way or another. And so letting yourself be a husk and like letting it poison your relationship with your spouse and like and letting it seep into the way that you approach your kids is huge. I struggled with depression early on in my parenting and I was, as somebody with a psychology background, I was infinitely aware of like, as I was going through it, being like, all I can try and do is not allow this to spill over into the rest of my life, which inevitably, of course it did. But the other piece is the old quote, which is the parent who parents best parents least. And I sometimes threaten my eldest with being like, you don't want me to parent you right now. Like, I am trying to give you the space that you need. And in fact, the studies back this up that like some of the best the best type of play for kids is in fact mixed age play with no parental supervision. Right. And it's allowing kids to solve their own problems and deal with their own dynamics and all of that stuff, and throwing parents into those kind of mixes like actually make the experience different. I mean, I'm very careful about when I'm involved in something where there's a secondary teacher, like a coach or a piano teacher or whatever, some sort of an instructor, and whether or not I'm present, not because I don't want to be and not because I'm not fascinated in what might be going on, but I recognize, you know, just as the cameras in a reality TV show, the outside viewer influences the interactions between the people. And so the parent isn't supposed to be all things. But I think the most important element that it keeps on coming back to is that like, but your job is to be the safe home. Right. And so whenever they come back and whatever their problems are and whatever, if they know that there's just a big hug, I was always big on making a nest. I would always make my space. I could deal with the world in whatever form it came at me as long as I knew that I could retreat to a nest and I had a safe, comfortable space. And I've really expanded that idea to my kids, particularly my oldest, who's more conscious of these kind of ideas. But just being like, let's make this a nest. Don't poop in the nest. Like, don't make this like a bad place, because this can be a safe, great place for all of us that we can all return to safely, so that we can all go out into the world and be ourselves, and the good and the bad can happen, but we have this like safe space here. And so that's kind of like, I mean, it's easier when your kids are a little bit older, like to be able to not have that attachment. I mean, I say that because like, you know, we've joked about implementing like a mom jar, where like every time my daughter says mom, like that she has to put like a coin in the mom jar, because I'm sure you know, like 10 minutes into your day, the mom jar is full. Just like, mom. Right. But yeah, like it is one of those things where you can, like, nobody can do it on their own. Everybody needs an opportunity to tag out, and whether that's a partner or your parents, or in-laws, or members of your community or whatever, like it is too much. But in a way, that's kind of a modern contrivance, because I keep on seeing research that validates, you know, many aspects of of what I would call a more traditional form. And by traditional, I mean even like growing up in the 80s, where it's like, go to the park, come back at 5, you know, like that kind of an attitude. And increasingly, it seems like the research keeps coming back that we are over-parenting our kids, and it is doing them a disservice, if not outright harm. And so I think that moms should take solace in that. All the moms who think they're bad moms because they, you know, ignored their kids today or whatever, I think need to like kind of have that idea where it's like, I don't need to be everything every day.
Yeah.
And in fact, in lots of that space that I'm not providing, is actually lots of good things are actually happening for our children.
Yeah, it was very helpful for me when I learned in school, actually, this idea that, there's some research that has been done on childcare and daycare and whether to do daycare or be a stay-at-home mom or whatever it is. And what they found is that it's the mom's happiness that matters the most, specifically the mom's. It's like, if she wants to work and that works for her, the kid's fine. If she wants to stay home and that's what she wants to do, the kid's fine. Like, it's really about their attachment with their mom. So it's really quality, not quantity, right? It's being able to be present. Another statistic that I learned in my attachment class was, if you're present 30% of the time, that's enough to create a secure attachment, right? Yeah. And so, I think those pieces are really key. And for me, the whole daycare thing, it's as you were talking about, like, it's not just about getting time for myself, but also for my children's sake, like, to not be the only influence in their life, right? Like, if I were the only influence, they'd also get all my neuroses and all my anxieties and like all of those things.
Yes. Which they'll probably get anyways, but.
Sure, I'm sure they will, but they also will have other adults who have different ways of doing it and different ways of disciplining, and like, children that they're around, like the things he learns from, the kids, and seeing how the kids behave and how they react emotionally and stuff like that. I'm the person he can come home to and talk about it and so on. But, I think another piece that I think about all the time is, like, I'm just not a play parent. Like, I just am not. Yep. I just don't.
No, me
it's
too.
Not my, like, I'm a nurturing parent. Like, and I was telling my friend last night too, I can't wait for the age when my oldest, well, both of them, but when my kids are old enough to like really ask questions. Because I want to be the mom that my kid is embarrassed by, because I will answer any question he has,
100%.
I want to be the mom that like his friends will come over to my house and ask their sex questions because they can't ask their parents, I'll be like, yes, I'll tell you anything you want to know. Like, I don't care if it's embarrassing or whatever. Like, I want to be that mom.
I feel like we have very similar parenting styles. Every time I find also, like, my attempts to be a play parent are often thwarted by my children's play, where it's just like, all right, I'm going to play along now. And they're like, you're doing it wrong. And I'm like, well, that's what I get for trying. Like, but like, I'll tell you, there's an enormous amount of satisfaction in being the answer parent.
Right.
I love it. Like, my son loves being, like, at the end of the day, and this is something that you'll find is that, like, plan for time at the end of the day when you're putting your kids down, like, after they've been like, how was school? Fine. Like, one word answers all evening and whatever. And if you reset your mind so that you're not like, this is the last thing I have to do before I'm free. Right. And you're just like, and you welcome the fact that, like, all of a sudden they're willing to engage and they're willing to talk about their days, and they're like, my son sometimes, like, especially when he's trying to procrastinate on sleep, will ask me a question that he knows that he's going to get a 20-minute response to, where I talk about all of the systems and all of the things and all of that stuff. But it's tremendously satisfying as they get there, which I'm sure that, like, when they feel safe and in those moments where they're ready to open up, like, it's really, really rewarding. It's really quite fun.
Yeah, my oldest, who's 4.5, I've already sort of started doing this with him. I mean, I kind of always have been. Like, if he asks a question, I'll just answer it. And I know he can't understand all of it, but I figure we might as well start the conversation. And the other night, actually, something happened at bedtime where Grant asked a question that had something to do with his body and sexuality. And I just, like, started going, and I was like, well, not all boys have penises. And, like, I was just sort of, like, getting into all these really deep topics. Yeah. And he was like, okay, I'm tired, Mommy. And I was like, okay, good night. And I told my husband about that later, and he's like, you just raw dog the sex talk, like, now, like, tonight? I was like, well, I think it's not going to be one talk, right? Like, I think it's going to be something that we'll continue to go into as it's age appropriate and so on. But, for now, like, he also needs play. Like, he needs other kids. And, like, my brother, who's so good at playing with him in a way that, like, it's very thrilling when Uncle Zach comes over because we don't play with him like that, right? But I don't think we necessarily should have to. Like, just like a partner can't be everything. Yep. A parent can't be everything either. And, like, we really do need that village. We need these other people to be able to interact with our children. And that's another reason why, like, having to pay to work or even just to have a break or whatever it is, like paying for childcare, I'm glad that at least in Alberta, it's much cheaper than it was when we started. And like, there are some things that are changing to help make childcare more accessible for people, which is huge, specifically for women at work. But, you know, it's a huge thing.
It's insane. It's insane. I mean, with my first, I was working, I took 6 months, I took the second half of the parental leave, and I did the math, and I was like, at the rate that I am paid to put my 1-year-old in childcare, I am putting every dollar I earn every month to childcare. And I was like, I was exhausted, and I was probably ready to not be full-time latched onto my son, but I was just like, I can't justify working to have someone else raise my kid.
Right.
And like you, I mean, I love childcare for a litany of reasons. I will praise teachers and ECEs to no end in a way. I always appreciated teachers, but like there's a new appreciation when they become like the people who are like, okay, now you're taking care of my son, you know, for the next 8 hours, and I can do some things and whatever. So it's totally insane. Like trying to reconcile like being pro-family and making childcare unaffordable. It's totally bizarre. But I think like and with childcare, I think that like what they find also, just as they found with, you know, because in Ontario they did all day daycare, they introduced like all day pre-K at an early age, which was essentially just like a subsidy for childcare, which is great. And but just like they see in students from lower socioeconomic status families, like over the summer, where kids in harder circumstances, they see themselves, you know, teachers notice that they decline and they come back at a level behind their peers. I think childcare is very much the same way. I think that like the degree to which it's important is influenced by what the home is like, and right. You know, the best thing that we can do to sort of to raise the bar on outcomes is just make life better for families and make life better for parents in general. And we would see less of some of the, you know, in some circumstances, the negative consequences of the attachment stuff around childcare and things like that. It's, right. As always, if we just did better for people, we would have better outcomes. I mean, it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's so much. I mean, in parenting and the whole deal, I mean, lots of useful lessons. I mean, particularly through sports and some of the research around sports and things like that, and critical development period times for boys, particularly when like it seems like there's a couple of times where boys are under intense pressure to change who they are. And, you know, like, and how sports can be an inoculating factor, because it's like it gives you like power as a jock. And that gives you the in a way your masculinity doesn't get challenged, and so you can be like a nerd and a jock, but without that sports to be that buffer against the world and things like that you then are just like yourself is going to be your own self is going to be challenged really hard against your peers to sort of normalize and conform and things like that. And anyways,
Yeah, there's so much here. And again, I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation, because there is so much, right? Like there's so much to think about, and it's really valuable to be able to have this conversation with you, like for my own reasons, but I think also to be able to share this conversation out, because I think some of these things are hard to talk about, actually. They're hard to express and hard to, you know, think about and feel about and all that. So I really appreciate you being here and having this chat with me.
Well, thanks for offering. This was lovely.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode with me and Jeremy Johnston-Kaye, all about parenting from a modern feminist perspective. Would love to hear your thoughts if you have anything that you want to share from your own journey and what you've been through around parenting, thinking about parenting, choosing not to parent, you know, whatever perspective you might be coming from. And again, this episode that you just heard was excerpted from the conversation Jeremy and I had about Pedro Pascal. And if you want to hear the rest of what we talked about around that, you can go back to the last episode on Pedro Pascal as the internet's daddy and enjoy that episode. So as always, it supports the show when you listen. It also supports if you share, like, subscribe. You can leave a rating or a review, which helps bring the show up in the algorithm. You can also support me and what we're doing here directly by going to juliepeters.ca/tipme and leaving a donation of any amount. But if you want to leave $50 or more, I will send you a personalized tarot reading just for you. And thank you deeply to those of you that have already sent a donation. It really feels good to know that folks are supporting what I'm doing, so thank you. And we will be back very soon with some more episodes on, I believe, True Blood will be the next one, and lots of ideas coming down the pipe, so stay tuned, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.